My name is Marco Lagrada, and welcome to the second edition of the Fightback Weekly Review. Now, in the past week, we've heard a lot about the shortage of protective medical equipment in this country, of masks and gowns, in particular in places like Ontario and in Quebec. We've heard harrowing stories coming out of Ontario of nurses having to use just one mask per shift, whereas normally they would use anywhere from 5 to 6. In Quebec, we've heard stories about nurses having to sanitize and reuse their masks in order to get through the day. Now, as a result of this, more and more of our healthcare workers have fallen ill and succumbed to COVID-19. In Italy and Spain, we've heard of healthcare workers dying by the hundreds as a result of this virus. And now, because of this situation, there's no telling how soon it may take for a situation like that to emerge here in Canada. So the question now on everyone's mind is, where is this protective equipment? Well, what has our government said? Well, our government has tried to explain the situation by saying we were taken by surprise, that no one could have predicted the COVID-19 pandemic. But in fact, this is an absolute lie. In 2006, a report was released predicting a pandemic almost identical to what we're seeing now with COVID-19. That advice was ignored by the government at the time. In 2010, a federal audit was released, raising concerns about the level of medical equipment in this country. Again, the advice in that audit was ignored by the government of the time. Just the other day, you had Canada's own health minister coming out and saying that public health in this country has been underfunded for decades. So given all this, can we really say that our government was taken by surprise by this pandemic? In fact, all of the facts prove otherwise. Now, because of this situation, our governments have been forced to catch up for lost time, for lack of a better word. They started by appealing to Canadian industry to try and pick up the slack. Although, unfortunately, Canadian business has proven entirely incapable of ramping up production to meet the demand for medical equipment. Now, as such, our government has been forced to turn to the global market in order to find the protective equipment we so desperately need. But here, they encounter hundreds of other buyers who are looking to do exactly the same thing, which means that the prices of these products have shot up enormously for masks, gowns, and ventilators. And the products don't go to those most in need. Who they go to is those with the most financial means. In other words, to the highest bidder. So far, the Canadian government has ordered 230 million surgical masks, of which we've received only 16 million. They placed an order for 75 million of the N95 masks, of which we've received absolutely none. Now, because of this situation, more and more countries have had to resort to more, shall we say, covert means in order to acquire this equipment. Just the other day, there's a report of a plane sent by the Quebec government to China in order to pick up masks, only to learn upon arriving that the masks had never actually left the factory, no doubt because some other buyer had offered them a better deal at the last moment. The other day, we had our Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, comparing the global market to what she called a Wild West situation. Now, in a way, this roughly approximates what Marxists have always said about the capitalist marketplace, that instead of production for need, what you find is absolute anarchy. Instead of a so-called community of nations, what you see is ruling class after ruling class, in nation after nation, trampling over one another in order to climb out on top. Now, the COVID-19 virus may have natural causes, but we should be absolutely clear that the pandemic does not. The pandemic was not a natural choice, not a natural cause, but a cold economic choice by the ruling class of country after country across the globe. And now it's our nurses, our doctors, and our loved ones who are being forced to pay the price. The fact is that the tools exist in society to fight this pandemic. The science, the technology, the industry, all of these things exist to fight this pandemic. But these tools have been wasted in the hands of incompetent politicians and profiteers in the private sector. More than ever, we need to take these tools into society's hands to run them not on the basis of profit, but in the interest of human need. To make use of the wealth and resources of all nations in order to properly fight this pandemic and bring it to an end. We have the tools in society to combat this pandemic, but the private market and the nation state are what's standing in our way.